Let me down easy.
10 women, 10 voices that should have defined generations of soul music, and every single one of them had their lives cut short, derailed, or destroyed by the people and the systems that were supposed to protect them.
A clean-up woman.
Abusive partners, exploitative labels, an industry that took everything they had and left them with nothing when they needed help the most.
If you need me, call me, no matter where you are, no matter.
Today, we tell their stories right. Not the sanitized version, the real one. Let's get into it. Number 10, Brenda Holloway.
Every little bit hurts.
Brenda Holloway, born in 1946 in California, signed to Motown at 17 years old as the label's very first West Coast artist. Beautiful, gifted, classically trained on violin, flute, and piano before she ever cut a record.
You say you're coming home, yet you never phone.
Barry Gordy spotted her lip-syncing at a DJ party in Los Angeles and signed her on the spot, reportedly attracted as much to her looks as to her voice.
Yet you won't let me go.
Her debut single, Every Little Bit Hurts, was a song she had already recorded at a smaller label 2 years earlier. She was reluctant to record it again. She cried through multiple takes in the studio. The finished record, raw with real emotion, climbed to number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1964 and became one of the defining soul records of the decade. Aretha Franklin covered it. The Spencer Davis Group covered it. It became a Northern Soul anthem in Britain.
If you will stay.
And then Motown systematically sidelined her. Label staff in Detroit regarded her as temperamental, a troublemaker, because she dressed too boldly and performed too dynamically.
And you're the boy who has to say when I should.
Gordy's own people reportedly told her she looked too much like Tina Turner. A planned second album was scrapped without explanation. The material she was given got thinner. The promotion dried up. By 1968, Brenda Holloway was 22 years old, and she walked away, not because she failed, but because she refused to keep giving herself to a system that was actively diminishing her.
You wanted before.
She co-wrote You've Made Me So Very Happy. That same year, a song, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, took to the top of the pop charts in 1969, and she made almost nothing from it. She married a minister and raised 3 daughters and largely disappeared from the music she'd given everything to as a teenager. She came back decades later. Beloved on the Northern Soul circuit in Britain, celebrated by a country that had discovered her on import records while her own label was telling her she was too much. Every little bit of it hurt, and she never fully got the recognition she was owed.
I'm a toy, and you're the boy who has to say when.
Number 9, Esther Phillips, Little Esther. Esther Mae Jones, born in Galveston, Texas in 1935. By the age of 14, she was performing at talent contests in the Watts section of Los Angeles, singing with a maturity that stopped rooms dead.
Stands a little rain.
Bandleader Johnny Otis discovered her at one of those shows. She was so young, he dressed her in pigtails and ribbons and called her Little Esther. The disguise didn't matter. Her voice was unmistakable.
I can stand a little rain.
In 1950, 15-year-old Little Esther hit number 1 on the R&B charts with Double Crossing Blues. She stayed there for 9 consecutive weeks, a record at the time for any artist of her age, male or female.
I can stand a little rain.
She was, by almost any measure, the most precocious and gifted R&B vocalist America had produced up to that point. And then the industry took her on the road. A teenage girl surrounded by hardened adult musicians. No protection, no guardian, no system designed to look after her. By her own accounts, and those of people who knew her, it was on the road during this period that she was introduced to heroin. She was still a teenager. She would struggle with the addiction for the rest of her life.
It's just another taste of life.
In 1962, a future country star named Kenny Rogers heard her singing at a club in Houston, Texas, where she'd retreated to rebuild. He arranged a recording contract, and Esther Phillips, she'd renamed herself from a gas station sign, refusing to be called Little Anything anymore, recorded Release Me. It hit #1 on the R&B charts, broke into the pop top 10, and became her signature record. But addiction never released her. She checked in and out of rehabilitation programs, made remarkable records for Atlantic and Kudu throughout the 60s and 70s, won a Grammy nomination that Aretha Franklin famously redirected to her from the stage, and kept performing with astonishing power right until her body gave out. When she died in 1984 at 48 from liver and kidney failure, the direct result of a lifetime of drug abuse that began when she was a child on the road. She was buried in an unmarked pauper's grave. She was later reinterred. But the marker came too late for the woman who deserved a monument. Number 8, Lorraine Ellison. Lorraine Ellison, born in Philadelphia in 1931 into a deeply musical gospel family, sang in church from the age of 6, led family gospel groups through her 20s.
When things went wrong, babe.
By the time she crossed over into secular soul music in her mid-30s, she had already accumulated more raw emotional experience than most singers twice her age, and it showed in every note she sang.
Baby, wasn't I there?
In October 1966, she walked into a recording studio in New York for a last-minute session that had opened up when Frank Sinatra canceled. A full 46-piece orchestra was already booked, already paid, already tuned. Producer Jerry Ragavoy had stayed up all night reworking a song he'd written for just this kind of voice. And Lorraine Ellison stood in front of that orchestra and sang "Stay With Me, Baby" live with the full ensemble in essentially one complete performance, and produced what many critics still call the greatest single vocal performance in the history of soul music. The song begins quietly, almost a whisper, a woman pleading with a man not to leave her. And then her voice builds and breaks and rebuilds and finally erupts into something that doesn't sound like singing, so much as it sounds like a human being completely surrendering to the truth of what they feel. John Anderson of Yes called it heartbreaking. Bette Midler used it in her film, The Rose. Janis Joplin covered the songs Ellison had recorded first. Every artist who heard her recognized immediately what she was. But the industry never figured out how to sell her. She was in her 30s when she hit, not a teenager. She was gospel-rooted and uncompromising in a market that wanted something easier. The hits didn't come. The label dropped her. She recorded 3 unreleased albums for Philadelphia International that have never been officially released to this day. In the mid-70s, she gave up the music business entirely to take care of her ailing mother. Lorraine Ellison spent the last years of her career not in studios, but in a sick room, caring for someone she loved more than she loved fame. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer and died in 1983 at 51. Largely forgotten outside of Northern Soul circles and a small community of listeners who knew she had made one of the most extraordinary records anyone had ever sung. She deserved infinitely more than she got. Listen, 90% of you watching these videos right now ain't subscribed yet. If these stories are blowing your mind, imagine what you're missing. Hit subscribe, turn on that bell, and join the R&B fans who never miss a Groove Lens upload. Number 7, Florence Ballard. Florence Ballard, Detroit, born 1943. She was the one who founded the group. Not Diana Ross, not Mary Wilson. Baby, don't leave me. It was Florence Ballard who pulled the original members together as teenagers in the Brewster Douglas housing projects, who held auditions, who chose the name Supremes from a list when they needed to change it from the Primettes. In 1960, when Ballard was 17 years old, she was raped at knife point by a local basketball player named Reggie Harding after being separated from her brother at a sock hop in Detroit. The assault shattered something in her. Her close friends Mary Wilson and Diana Ross noticed immediately that she had changed, that the fearless, unflappable Florence, who'd held the group together, had become someone more fragile, more prone to reaching for something to dull the edges. The trauma was never properly addressed. In the industry of the early 1960s, it essentially never was. At Motown, the group Florence had founded was systematically refashioned around Diana Ross, who Berry Gordy had entered into a personal relationship with. By 1964, the year Where Did Our Love Go hit number 1, Ballard had been relegated to background vocals on the group she'd built from scratch. She continued performing, continued recording, continued giving everything she had to a situation that was actively humiliating her, as Berry Gordy's romantically motivated reorganization of the group's vocal hierarchy became increasingly impossible to ignore. In July 1967, Motown fired Florence Ballard from the Supremes. The day after her 24th birthday, an ABC Records contract followed, but the support didn't. Motown had a documented policy of blocking radio stations from playing former Motown artists. Her singles failed to chart. She sued Motown for $8.7 million in unpaid royalties and lost. Her marriage broke apart amid domestic disputes. She lost her house to foreclosure. By 1972, she had moved into her sister's home and applied for welfare. Florence Ballard died of cardiac arrest in February 1976 at 32 years old. She had recently gotten sober, bought a new home, and begun recording again, a musical comeback just starting to take shape. One critic called her death one of rock's greatest tragedies. The character of Effie White in Dreamgirls is based directly on her life. Jennifer Hudson dedicated her Oscar for Best Supporting Actress to Florence Ballard's memory in 2007. The woman who founded the Supremes died on welfare at 32. Number 6, Mary Wells. Mary Wells, Detroit, 1943. She walked into Motown at 16 years old with a song she'd written herself for Jackie Wilson. Berry Gordy signed her on the spot and had her record the song herself instead. It went to #1. She became Motown's very first female superstar, the first Motown artist to break into the UK charts, the first Motown artist on American Bandstand. She toured with the Beatles, and the Beatles told the world she was their favorite American singer. In 1964, My Guy reached #1 on the pop charts and gave Motown its first #1 pop hit, the biggest song of the label's young existence, produced by Smokey Robinson. Mary Wells was 21 years old and at the absolute peak of her powers. And then her husband told her to leave. Herman Griffin, her first husband and a backup vocalist himself, convinced Wells to walk away from Motown the moment she turned 21, and her original contract, the one she'd signed as a 17-year-old minor, could be challenged. He pushed her toward a $500,000 deal with 20th Century Fox that included promises of film roles. What the deal did not include was Smokey Robinson or Motown's songwriting machine or any of the infrastructure that had made Mary Wells a star. She also revealed in her biography that Griffin had pressured her into multiple abortions during their marriage, choices that were not fully hers. She left him eventually, left the label, left Detroit, and spent the next 3 decades watching her career decline while Motown went on without her, using the songs she had made famous to establish the careers of artists who'd come up behind her. In 1990, Wells was diagnosed with laryngeal cancer. She had no health insurance. The disease destroyed her voice, the instrument that had given Motown its foundation, and she couldn't pay her medical bills. Friends organized a fundraiser. Bruce Springsteen gave $10,000. Rod Stewart gave $10,000. Diana Ross gave $15,000. The R&B Foundation raised over $50,000. It wasn't enough. Mary Wells died in Los Angeles in July 1992 at 49 years old, unable to speak above a whisper, having sued Motown for unpaid royalties the year before she died. Motown settled for a 6-figure sum. She passed before she ever saw real justice. Number 5, Linda Jones. Linda Jones, Newark, New Jersey, born 1944 into a gospel family, singing with the Jones Singers from the age of 6. She worked at a pie factory while performing at local clubs at night, because that is what soul music in the 1960s looked like if you weren't already a star. She was discovered at one of those club performances, signed to the Warner Brothers R&B subsidiary Loma Records, and in May 1967 released a song called Hypnotized. Here is how that record came to be. Producer George Kerr brought her into the studio with a song called Hypnotized and told her to run through it. She was still learning the lyrics. He quietly told the engineer to hit record anyway. She sang it in one unrehearsed take and mispronounced the word as hypnotized instead of hypnotized. She wanted to redo it. Kerr refused. That mispronunciation, that rawness, that sense of a woman completely consumed by the feeling of the song rather than the execution of it. That is the record. and it hit number 4 on the R&B charts, becoming Loma's best-selling single of the entire decade. Linda Jones had been diabetic her entire life. She managed it with insulin injections while maintaining a punishing touring schedule because she had no choice if she wanted to keep performing and paying her bills.
Make me hug you.
In March 1972, she was in the middle of a 2-week engagement at the Apollo Theater in Harlem, the culmination of a career resurgence built on a critically acclaimed new album.
My heart is yours to.
She performed the matinee show. She went home to her mother's house in Newark to rest before the evening show. Her mother went to wake her and found her in a diabetic coma.
Gee, I'm so hypnotized.
Linda Jones was rushed to the hospital and died that same day, March 14th, 1972. She was 27 years old. The evening show never happened. The resurgence never got its chance. She had just scored her biggest hit in 5 years, a cover of For Your Precious Love that critics described as transcendent. The previous night at the Apollo, her producer had watched her drop to her knees at the edge of the stage and watched the crowd go completely silent. He said he had never seen anything like it. The next day, she was gone. Number 4, Bettye Wright. Bettye Wright, Miami, Florida, born 1953 into a large Pentecostal gospel family where singing was not a choice. It was the air everyone breathed. She was performing with her family's gospel group before she could read. By 11, she was recording secular music. By 15, she had written and recorded Girls Can't Do What the Guys Do, one of the most emotionally direct early feminist soul records in American music. By 17, she was standing in the studio recording Clean Up Woman, a song she wrote herself about the other woman who steps in and takes what you're not appreciating, delivered with a clipped, controlled fury that makes it feel like a cross-examination rather than a song. Clean Up Woman hit number 2 on the R&B charts and number 6 on the pop charts, going gold in 1971 and becoming one of the defining records of early 1970s soul.
It's because you picked up a man of mine.
Bettye Wright was 18 years old. She later won a Grammy for Best R&B Song in 1975 for Where Is the Love? She became one of the most respected voices in Miami soul, a mentor to younger artists, a producer, a writer. But her personal life was repeatedly marked by abusive relationships, including a widely documented turbulent marriage to singer and guitarist Bobby Womack, whose history of violence toward the women in his life is extensively recorded. Wright herself has spoken in interviews about the difficulty of separating the public music career from the private pain, about what it means to sing songs about strength and dignity while living through situations that tested both. She kept performing. She kept writing for other artists. She kept showing up. She produced records that other people had hits with while fighting battles at home that most of her audience never knew about. Bettye Wright died in May 2020 of cancer at 66 years old. She is one of the most important singer-songwriters in the history of Miami soul, Grammy-winning, career-spanning, and still dramatically under-recognized in the official record of American music history. Clean Up Woman alone should have made her a household name for life. Number 3, Irma Thomas.
Sitting home alone.
Irma Thomas, New Orleans, Louisiana, born 1941. The Soul Queen of New Orleans, a title she earned, not given. By the time she was 19, she had already been married, already had 3 children, and already been playing clubs on the New Orleans circuit for several years.
Time waits for no one.
She signed with Ron Records in the early 1960s and began recording the kind of deep, churchy Southern soul that made Stax Records famous, except she was doing it in New Orleans, on smaller labels, with less national support, before most people knew what Southern soul was.
Some folks think you're happy.
Wish Someone Would Care came in 1964, produced by Alan Toussaint, the same producer who defined New Orleans soul for a generation. The song is about loneliness so specific it becomes universal.
The bad, the hurt, all of this goes to
A woman asking whether anyone in the world is paying attention to what she's going through. It reached number 17 on the pop charts and number 5 on the R&B charts.
all of your trials. Small.
Irma Thomas was 23 years old with 3 children and a career finally beginning to open up. The Rolling Stones heard her recording of Time Is On My Side in 1964 and released their own version the same year, which became one of their early signature hits. Irma Thomas's original barely charted. That dynamic, the black female originator overshadowed by the white male act that covered her, would follow her for decades and became one of the defining injustices of the 1960s soul era. Her personal life was marked by a series of abusive and exploitative relationships that she has spoken about candidly in interviews over the years. She survived. She kept singing.
The good, the bad, the hurt.
And then, in August 2005, Hurricane Katrina flooded New Orleans and destroyed her restaurant, the Lion's Den, a venue she had built over decades as a community gathering place. She lost everything. She rebuilt. She has continued performing into her 80s, one of the most resilient figures in American music history.
I wish someone would care.
But her commercial recognition never matched her talent, and the quiet devastation of that particular injustice, watching lesser artists receive credit for what she originated, is a tragedy that played out over the full length of her career. Number 2, Tammi Terrell.
If you need me, call me, no matter where you are.
Thomasina Montgomery, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, born 1945. She was 11 years old when she first began experiencing the severe migraine headaches that would shadow her entire life.
No matter how far.
Don't worry, baby.
By 17, she was on the road singing backup for James Brown's touring revue. And James Brown was abusing her. Bobby Bennett, a fellow member of Brown's famous Flames, witnessed one of the incidents directly. His account on record: he beat Tammi Terrell terrible. She was bleeding, shedding blood. Tammi left him because she didn't want her butt whipped.
Ain't nobody low enough.
She left Brown in 1963 after he assaulted her for not watching his entire performance from the side of the stage.
Ain't no mountain high enough.
Berry Gordy signed her in 1965, renamed her Tammi Terrell, and paired her with Marvin Gaye for a series of duets that became some of the most beloved recordings in soul music history. 7 top 40 singles, including Ain't No Mountain High Enough, Ain't Nothing Like the Real Thing, and You're All I Need to Get By. With Marvin Gaye, Tammi Terrell sounded like the truest possible version of herself, joyful, soaring, unguarded. The recordings are astonishing. But between those sessions, she entered a relationship with David Ruffin, lead singer of The Temptations, who was already secretly married with children and a girlfriend when he proposed to her on stage and she accepted. She announced their engagement publicly. She later found out from other people that he was lying. The violent arguments that followed are documented by multiple witnesses, including Earl Van Dyke of the Funk Brothers, who witnessed Ruffin beating Terrell inside Hitsville, USA itself. The relationship ended when Ruffin hit her across the face with his motorcycle helmet.
If you ever need a helping hand.
On October 14, 1967, while performing with Marvin Gaye at Hampton-Sydney College in Virginia, Tammi Terrell collapsed into Gaye's arms on stage. She was diagnosed with a malignant brain tumor. She underwent 8 surgeries over the following 2 years. By 1969, she was confined to a wheelchair, had lost her hair and most of her sight, and weighed 93 pounds. Her mother, furious at Motown's failure to protect her daughter from David Ruffin, banned the entire label from her daughter's funeral. Only Marvin Gaye was permitted to attend. He delivered the eulogy while You're All I Need to Get By played. Tammi Terrell died on March 16, 1970. She was 24 years old, 1 month before her 25th birthday. Marvin Gaye, by multiple biographers' accounts, never fully recovered. His landmark album, What's Going On, released the following year, was shaped in part by her death. Number 1, Bettye LaVette.
Let me down easy.
Here is the name at number 1. Not because she died young. She lived, but because her story is the fullest and most honest portrait of what the music industry did to black female soul singers for 4 decades, and because her survival itself is remarkable enough to demand the top spot. Bettye LaVette, Detroit, Michigan, born 1946. She signed to Atlantic Records at 16 years old and released My Man, He's a Lovin' Man in 1962, which went to number 7 on the R&B charts. The follow-up, Let Me Down Easy, recorded in 1965, is widely considered by critics to be one of the greatest deep soul recordings ever made. A performance so emotionally precise and vocally controlled that it sounds less like a woman singing a song than a woman giving testimony under oath about the specific geography of her own heartbreak. Atlantic didn't promote it. It barely charted. What followed was one of the most extraordinary stories of sustained industry rejection in the history of American music.
It was so nice.
For nearly 40 years, 4 decades, Bettye LaVette made records that labels shelved, released, but didn't promote, buried, or simply never put out at all. A complete album she recorded for Atlantic in 1972 was shelved without explanation and sat unreleased for 30 years. She recorded for Motown. She recorded for West End. She recorded for Epic. She kept recording. The records either didn't come out or came out without support, without promotion, without the basic infrastructure that allows an artist to reach an audience. She has spoken candidly in her autobiography and in dozens of interviews about the abusive relationships she navigated during those years, relationships with men in and around the industry who held power over her career and her livelihood, relationships that mirrored the exploitation of the industry itself.
But now it's all over.
She describes a life of being perpetually undervalued, perpetually overlooked, perpetually asked to give more than she was being offered in return. In 2005, at 58 years old, Bettye LaVette finally received sustained mainstream recognition when her album, I've Got My Own Hell to Raise, won critical acclaim that changed the trajectory of her career. She performed A Change Is Gonna Come at the Kennedy Center during Barack Obama's inaugural celebration in 2009 and reduced the audience to tears. She was 62 years old. The voice that Atlantic Records shelved in 1972 was still there, still intact, still telling the truth. She had simply been waiting 40 years for someone to listen.